So first of all, Rajat, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm so glad that you found time for us. This is for our audience. We have Rajat with us, and we just found out that he's no longer with Google. Rajat was leading Tensorflow, and which he did it for several years. He was really instrumental in that. He has created some very interesting opportunities for Google and a lot of IITians. If, for some of you, if you don't know, TensorFlow is part of literally every single AI system out there. Rajat, why don't you talk about yourself a little bit, what you are working on and what is the big thing for you?
Sure. Thanks, Sanjiv. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to many of you and tell you about all of this stuff. So I had a great run, at Google as Sanjiv is really running TensorFlow there, where TensorFlow has become a key part of a lot of AI things that people are building. People have been able to do amazing things with TensorFlow. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to be there and be a key part of it. One of the key things over the last few years I've seen is, we've seen huge progress with machine learning and AI, and we're seeing lots of folks use it in interesting ways, especially in the bigger companies like Google and many of the other big companies as well. Where I saw a gap was machine learning being leveraged to do interesting things on the business side. It was still pretty hard for typical corporations, typical enterprise companies to pick it up and do things. And so, I left Google recently to work in that space and see how we can make a difference in leveraging these technologies to really change how certain things are done on the enterprise side.
Rajat, AI is pretty much used literally everywhere now. In fact, I tried that vacuum cleaner, which runs by itself, and it uses AI. I remember seeing the presentation a few years ago that it is to the extent that they are mapping everybody's house. And they are even talking to companies like Google. And now Google even knows how every single corner in my house looks like, which is a very interesting example. But on the same note, Rajat, people are using, and even Google is extensively using AI for listening to people. What I mean by listening to people is really understanding the context and providing them better results. So where it is going, where do you see really the future of AI? Or the areas where we don't know about it and it is being leveraged?
Yeah. So I think there's enough hype about AI that you often hear about a lot of these things, sometimes before they are real in some sense. For example, one of the areas where, not to say that it's not used, we've been hearing about self-driving cars for a long time. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's been a huge progress from the decade ago that we started hearing about these, but we're not quite there. I know we hear companies claiming that it's right around the corner. I think we're getting close, but at least the self-driving cars as we think of them are probably going to take a few more years. That said, that same kind of technology is in use in the very simplest form in the robot in your home that's doing the cleaning. Of course, much simpler than that in the home at this point, but even simpler things outside like deliveries and so on. Now that's sort of the common things that we look at. There are lots and lots of other areas that we don't see that happen, in areas like, of course, we talk about healthcare, where AI is helping, not just generally, but in the current crisis, for example, COVID-19, there are companies that have built ways to actually help identify that somebody has a disease based on chest x-rays and things like that. And there are lots of other, of course, image-based techniques that are being used in radiology and other areas as well. But other than that, there's been as well, and we continue to see progress on that side. So that's healthcare itself. In terms of, if you think about bigger challenges that we face as a society, as humans, there are lots of these grand challenges where we've made a ton of progress because of machine learning, because of AI. If you think about things like, weather prediction, climate change, et cetera, that we talk about from a scientific perspective, there's In some cases, we're already seeing impact from AI because people can use these fancier, the better models to make better predictions, more educated guesses on where things are going and sort of go from there. In other cases, we will continue to see those improvements over the next several years. Coming closer to where we are, I think we'll continue to see AI being used more and more in the products we use. In the products our companies that we work for use as well. And both of these, I think, are still early days. There are some of the early examples of products that we've seen from companies like Google, of course, are, say, Google Photos, which is very obvious, right? It just figures out what are there in the pictures for you. You talked about the Google Assistant and Alexa and all of these other assistants that are listening and understanding you. That's still very early. There's a long way to go in terms of from where we are to really truly conversational or truly understanding what we mean when we say this. It kind of works for the basic things and is great. It's a huge improvement over where things were just a couple of years ago, but I expect to see a lot more progress over the next few years.
On that, I have a question, Rajat. So last year, I believe at Google conference, the CEO of Google came and he talks about you talk to your phone and it will make an appointment for you at your hairdresser or to car mechanic, to all of those, right? Technologically, it seems pretty straightforward to me today, but I haven't really seen a great adoption of it even today. So what is really holding such innovation back? That's one. Second is, that's interesting. Where I really see the challenge is, we talk about a lot of these simpler applications which make life a little easier. But when we talk about health, I haven't seen any major global level collaboration where I can have, like, for example, a system that every single X-ray is available and we are training these models. So where is it going? Because you have worked a lot in the healthcare space. So I'd love to hear your views on both.
Yeah. So the first one itself, you mentioned it, a very specific example of an app that hasn't quite taken off really in some sense the way you would like. And that's where I think the difference is between assistants solving like specific answers, like questions to set a reminder or play a specific song, etc., versus a slightly more complex thing like the appointment setting that you were saying, because often there are it's an entire conversation you need to have to do that appointment. If you're doing it online, then you are going through a conversation, you're taking action yourself. When you ask an assistant to do that, they're often just little things like that. You might ask for 9 o'clock, maybe 9 o'clock's not available. Do you want the next day or like an hour later? And just these little things like that, conversationally, these assistants, these machine learning models are not quite there yet. They're improving very, very rapidly. Over just the last 2 years, 3 years, we've seen huge improvements in natural language processing and expect those to start rolling out in this area in the next couple of years and are seeing advantages from them. Going to the healthcare example that you're talking about, I think healthcare is seeing progress, but it's not quite there. On the research side, I think there's been a lot of progress where we see early models which actually have great potential that are showing like, okay, you talked about chest x-rays. There are things where you take a picture of the back of the eye and understand a lot of things from them. And basically wherever the modality is a picture and you're trying to understand things, if you have enough data, we've seen that these models can outperform even the best humans, or even the best doctors or the specialists in those fields typically. But that's a very narrow modality and so on. Now we've seen that doing really well in our tests and the data sets that we've seen in research. It's not always translated to real world impact yet for a number of reasons. One, in the medicine area and the healthcare area, you want to be super careful in what you deploy. The bar for being right is very, very high. And it's the same kind of, in the US, we have FDA approvals for a good reason, right? You have new medicine, you have new techniques. You want to go through a process before you let them be for whatever.
Is this today, if I look at it, and I am personally in the AI space and I go and preach large brands how to use AI and solve their problems. How can they really find some interesting data point which can solve that interesting problem? And one example I can give you is we are saying is, since we are working with the CPG companies, that you can take a picture of the menu. Any restaurant you go, you take a picture, we analyze it, and we tell you what brands are there, if your product is there or not. And if your product is not there, what product you should present to that restaurant or that organization, and how you should present it. It's not just what, how you should present it, all that. And we are leveraging a lot of things, of course, OCR, NLP, AI, a lot of predictive analytics around it. So the challenge I see, the biggest challenge I see it is the data set is missing in this scenario, and that's the biggest problem we are seeing it. Don't you feel, I believe in healthcare is the same problem. We don't have enough data to accurately predict when we talk about the bars are high. It is about the quality of the, not, I don't think, it's not just the quality, it's the quantity of data too. Or is it the quantity is there, but the noise is there, so you're not able to find the right results? What is really the problem when it comes to healthcare? And specifically, let's talk about just X-rays.
Yeah, in a very narrow problem like that, I would say like X-rays, I don't think it's a data limitation. There are, again, not everybody has access to all the data, but there are lots of hospitals across US or other countries that have tons of X-rays, and they're good enough. I mean, I would say they have enough numbers for us to really learn from them. On the, along with that, there have been lots of improvements in terms of being able to leverage learnings from other data sets and applying these, so we can actually train with smaller data sets. We don't need as large data sets as we used to need just a few years ago again. And so if you take a very narrow case saying, let's say you have X-rays of a certain kind and you're trying to record or trying to diagnose one specific thing, one specific disease or something like that, I think these models can do really, really well now. Models are too black box, where people don't understand. They made a decision. I don't understand where that came from. Can I really trust it? How do we build that trust? And again, from a technology perspective, there's been a lot of work, but to bring that into the systems, to bring that to the people, there's still another layer of the application building, the right kind of things that need to go in to make that happen.
So when you said trust, now trust is a very complex word, as you and me both know what trust really means. And I have seen several companies raised almost $1 billion till date, and they leveraged AI for fraud detection, especially in the financial space. And banks were writing checks to them left and right. And interestingly enough, majority of those companies just disappear. So don't you think there is a need to create a global fabric for research today, specifically when it comes to healthcare? So the whole world come together, all the health organizations come together, create a system where you anonymize the patient data, but you still have relevant data available. So the organization can do the research. And this data is available, either paid or free, doesn't matter. There's a secondary issue, but it is available to everyone.
If you think about a pure global database with everybody doing the right thing because it's good for the world, that doesn't happen. Markets, and the reason we, most of us here, especially in the US or across a large part of the world today, believes in capitalism, is that it works in lots of ways. There are, that said, the ways we've done capitalism and the ways we implement it aren't always great, and we see different kinds of issues and lots of variation between the haves and the have-nots and stuff. And those are real problems to be thought through. But at its core, the fact that you have a free economy where people are trying to do things that make sense, that help them, eventually help everybody else in the economy as well. And if you believe those core tenets, then trying to say, no, we're going to put this extra structure, more governmental, like not just within the US but across the world, is in some ways just fooling ourselves that we'll make that work. I mean, we've seen that fail in so many different ways. Should we try it? I think there are things we should try. I mean, there are international organizations, whether you take United Nations or WHO, or in different areas that are doing good work, and it's important for them to be there, supported by all of these pieces. And there is a certain level of sharing that's important, that's across the world. We are seeing some of that sharing already, right? We are seeing, especially we talked about COVID-19 case, a lot of groups are coming together and sharing whatever data they have about the patients. A lot of countries are doing that. A lot of hospitals are doing that. And so putting more of that together that makes sense from them is helpful. There's going to be some help and some thought that the governments need to put in that help align those totally. But to a large extent, they also have to make sense economically to these different players in the game, and that's just going to lead to much better results, basically. Yeah, going back to the paranoia around, say, US versus China or other countries as well. I think there are a few different things at play there. One, of course, is is this sort of if somebody gets access to the best AI, are they going to be the winner and winner take all kind of thing? That's sort of one side of it. Another side of it is the privacy implications if data from within those countries sort of leaks out to others, et cetera. And they're both are being done at different levels. On the privacy side, each region, US has its own laws today. In fact, California has its own laws. Europe's created some laws. China has some laws. India is creating some laws over the last few years as well. And we'll continue to see that play, and people iterate on different areas, iterate on that until we get to something better. On the technology side, hopefully for the privacy stuff, we can make progress on technologies that allow us to leverage that data without losing the privacy elements. I mean, there's some work on that with differential privacy, federated learning, et cetera. But I would say it's still very, very early. So that's the one side. On the paranoia that AI, the winner of AI will take, the winner take all kind of thing, it's still, and where we are, it seems, even if we get to AGI, which most people even in the field don't believe we are anywhere close to, we are still far away from a point where that kind of a scenario is possible. So yes, there is paranoia, but I don't think there's enough basis for that paranoia. That said, it is important for each country, including the US, to invest in this. It's one of the key technologies. And it's not just about, unlike the arms race, this technology is not just about helping build those arms, right? It's actually going to have a huge impact on what we're doing in the societies. Whatever country is ahead. So for example, Google's done really well from a research perspective, and it shows in the products that Google has. Similarly, the countries and the regions that stay ahead in this game, it'll benefit those regions in lots of different ways. It's not just about arms race. It'll hopefully, people continue to do it in open. For example, the research that we've seen over the last 10 years, at least 99% of the research in this field has been completely in the open. And I would say that has made a huge difference in just accelerating and having these things go much faster. If all of these had been closed, each done in silos where each one was trying to do their own thing, we would probably still be like in where we were in 2013 or 2014. So that pace of innovation is hugely because we're doing these things in the open. So it's important to keep that openness and really leverage that, while yes, being mindful of how do we all benefit from this in different ways.
So what do you see as a future of TensorFlow? The reason I'm asking this question is almost every single company and every single time we have talked about AI, at least in my close network, from NVIDIA to Amazon to everyone, they are talking about TensorFlow. And you were in the helm of TensorFlow. You led the team for a long time. It won't be wrong to say that you are one of the key architects of that. So where do you see the TensorFlow is going, and what do you see as a future?
So if you think about, I'll step back and talk about, say, programming, right? We started programming computers since the early days of computers, basically, and it's been, 50 years, actually a lot more now.
Seems like yesterday.
Over this time, sorry, yeah.
I'm saying seems like yesterday.
That's right. It does seem like yesterday, and I forget how old I'm getting. still early, still a long way to go. Hopefully, the healthcare improvements and all of that keep us healthy for a long time. But thinking about programming and thinking about all the devices we have around us, the way I see it, and machine learning has sort of been likened to software 2.0, whatever, or 3.0, whatever you want to call it. The basic idea with programming has been that we tell computers exactly what to do. And the way I see machine learning is it's really the same kind of thing, except instead of telling them what to do by specifying rules, what we are saying is we're teaching them by doing or showing them a lot of examples. Right? And so if you think about it that way, now over time, more and more of the programming that we have is going to be replaced by learned models in some sense. And not everything. There's still room for the traditional programming where you want very specific rules, and there's clearly value in that. But wherever things get more tricky, where you have to put out 10 different rules and things are more fuzzy, and there are lots and lots of examples, right? Of course, wherever you think about images or text, etc., which are not as precise as just numbers, but even where there are numbers, when the precision is not quite the same way, there's some fuzziness, then we want machine learning. And so if you think about every place where you have programming today, where you have some programs that are running, every single device that you have that, in the future, I expect machine learning to be running on those. So software, it's, software like TensorFlow, they expect it to be running not just in the data centers, on the phones, of course, it's running on the workstations, on the machines that we're talking through right now. In fact, if we're talking through Zoom, Zoom has all these models to, to cut out, to have a fake background and virtual background and all of that. Things like that can use machine learning if they're not already, and they can do a great job with that, right? So these are going to be everywhere. We have things running on really, really tiny devices, on microcontrollers, which don't even have a full-fledged OS, and so to speak, or just a real-time operating system. And so we'll see machine learning really spread through every single thing that we're doing, and we won't think of it as a separate piece, right? It's just part of the software. Just like we think of software, that's how we should think of machine learning in the future.
So when we talk about automating appointment and all, you and me both know several tasks can be completely automated, and it will be automated very quickly. In fact, I have a friend, he's into call center business, and they make almost $2 billion with this call center operation. The whole business is ready for disruption. I have another friend of mine, actually, I'll be talking to their CIO tomorrow, is they have almost $800 million revenues, and they provide the infrastructure to these call center or support companies, software technologies. So there is a lot of evolution happening. These are the things going to happen, and it's going to change. Is our future going to be like the movie Ready Player One or different? I don't know. I'm not the person who knows I will be here or not by that time. But the question I have is, let's talk about something very, very fun, simple. And Amazon recently got some certification to deliver products through drones. Now, in my head, I'm just thinking that if the drone start delivering and bringing things to our home, then we completely eliminate millions and millions of people in the logistics operation involved. Yeah. At the same time, when we talk about self-driven car, I'm mixing it a little bit. Self-driven car, I am in that industry since 97. I'm talking about that since 97, maybe way before all of you guys. I was in Singapore, designed the first vehicle location system of Asia. And the challenge was always is infrastructure is not there, because we could do that in 98, 99, technologically, because the same thing, right? GPS was there. When you know GPS, you know the road, you can pretty much build the whole thing, but the infrastructure wasn't there. I personally think we are trying to solve this problem differently. I think the problem should be solved by rethinking the future of city, future of civilization, that how do we do settlement? Because there are a lot of things intertwined here. Earlier, we used to build cities next to water. That was the first thing. All the early settlers, all the early cities are around the water, because if you have the water, you have life. And then we start building city, middle of nowhere, and then we start bringing electricity there. And so huge challenge. With the solar, that problem goes away. We are already talking about zero carbon footprint. We are already talking about building things or cities where it's a carbon neutral when we talk about food and other things. But in reality, what we are really looking at the humanity is, how do we create a carbon neutral world if it can't be negative? Because there is a huge problem we have of pollution, sustainability, all of that. So where do you see the future is? How do you see the future, and how AI is going to solve that? And I really would like you to give one challenge to all our IITians and audience, so they start thinking about it and they start trying to solve that problem.
Sure. Let me start with the first one in terms of just challenges and the kind of things that you see. You know, the examples that you gave about how we build cities traditionally versus now, things have changed a lot. And there are definitely areas in ways where we should rethink this from the ground up. That said, it's very hard, you know, just like you can't necessarily change an existing company, you know, sometimes you replace it and a new one comes up and the old one dies. You'll probably see some of this in how we've built our cities and how we've built new things as well. And some of the things will be very new, which is just hard to do in the existing system. So can we take San Francisco and really rebuild it from the ground up today? Probably not. I mean, there are just too many constraints that we have to live with and work with. Uh, the good thing about, you know, people are, we are very innovative in terms of coming up with new kinds of things. You know, you mentioned drones earlier in terms of delivery, et cetera, and self-driving cars. Interestingly, you know, given where we are and some of the challenges we are seeing with self-driving cars, one of the things I'm starting to see that seems very promising to me personally is just flying cars, for example, right? I mean, there's from a technology perspective, it combines the two things that you just talked about. And it has different challenges, not the same ones that you see with self-driving cars, but a lot of the things, the issues that you see with self-driving cars are just not there because you're not limited to the infrastructure that you were talking about, right? Of course, in places like China, you're seeing where they're making special roads for just self-driving cars. And we'll see a mix of these and we'll see some of those go forward. And so thinking about, you know, that, again, that's just one example, something I really like and enjoy. And I like to think about some of these things sometimes. Okay, well, how can we change these things, right? One of the things I would say to folks out there, you know, engineers and others who are listening to this or who think about this is technology is one part that solves things that can really make huge changes in the world, but it doesn't solve everything. You know, it's about, if you think about, okay, I have this technology, I'm going to change everything because I have this technology. That's not necessarily the right way to start with. Often it is thinking about what's the problem you're trying to solve. And in this case, you know, if you talk about going from point A to point B, that can be solved with many different things, right? If you want to transport people, then it's self-driving cars or say flying cars or whatever. If it's delivering packages, which are still done through those same vehicles today, it's then, you know, drones are a valid thing as well and are a reasonable option as well and something that might play out as well. It's sort of like saying, you know, from an innovator's perspective or asking the people perspective, it's not like we want faster horses. It's we want to get from point A to point B and what's the best way to do that, and that's how we solve it. So really think about whatever you're trying to do. You know, technology is definitely, we can do some amazing things with technology, but that's not the starting point. The starting point should be the people, the problems, and the problems that we face on this world. And there are some really amazing challenges ahead of us. Some good, some not so good. You know, one of the big ones is, of course, climate change. There are lots of proposals to make changes in there to help from a technology perspective, and there are others from a people perspective. At the end of the day, I think we can combine those two to hopefully have you know, much broader impact. And if I think of the problems, climate change is probably one of the biggest one facing us over the next few decades. And so if we can think of ways, innovative ways to really improve that in different ways with all kinds of technologies, it's not just about software or just about AI. You know, you want alternative ways of generating energy. And we've made tons of progress on those, right? There's, again, how do you deliver those in these different things? How do you cut the costs down? How do you get water to many more people who don't have access to water? I recently read about this project which deployed this totally fully solar-based project, which converted basically desalination plant that they could deploy in some part of Kenya. And that brings water to thousands of folks that just did not have access to clean water at that point, right? And so once you deploy it, I mean, there's some cost. If you can bring this down, you can have access to water to so many other people. So these are some problems, some challenges that I would like folks to think about and really will make a difference to what we're doing in this world. Going back to, how I ended up here, personally, I had a, great time at IIT. I was at IIT Delhi a long time ago. It's been 25 years now. And the, you know, I've personally always enjoyed doing things that I was excited about, that I was curious about, that I wanted to know something new, that I learned something from. And I did that at IIT as well. I did that in school as well. Of course, there are a lot of other things that go in there. Of course, my focus was, okay, I enjoy this. Let me do this. Let me focus on this. Often to the detriment of ignoring everything else, and which isn't always a good thing, that I learned over time. But that did help me in terms of, I changed and tried out lots of different things within the software space. I guess that's something I was excited about and I stayed in. But I switched jobs. I went to startups, built all kinds of things, and really continued to learn throughout my career, and still do. There are always new things that I'm doing today. One thing that there's this whole idea of explore and exploit in machine learning, or certain kinds of problems, where the idea is you want to leverage your strengths to some extent, right? So you're exploiting everything you know, and you leverage those, and so you deliver value from those. But you want to continue the exploration, so you're not stuck in that minimum of whatever you know. And so that is really important as well. That combination of learning and leveraging your strengths is really important. If you can continue to do that well, that's great. Especially folks early in their career, exploration is way more important. The learning is way more important. That said, I don't think the value of learning goes away. You have to keep at it forever. We're going to be living fairly long lives. And learning, to me, is what keeps me going, because there's always something new to do.
Is there any key message you have for our audience, which you believe will inspire them and will give them some insight into your thought process?
So if there's one thing that I would go after, I would say is go after something that you're passionate about, go after something that you care about, that pushes you to work a lot harder than you would otherwise, to go beyond what you would do typically just for standard work. And yes, there will be, that said, and this is something that I've learned over time, there are, when you are passionate about something, there are things that you need to do because you're excited about them. There's a 20%, 30% that is maybe not as exciting as you would like, and that changes over time. But that is still important if you want to have an impact. And that's something that I learned over time, and I think is as important as the stuff that you're passionate about. So if you want to have an impact, picking the right area that you will care about, that you can stick with, that you will care about is definitely very, very important.